What if I told you that one of the bloodiest wars in human history didn't begin over land? It didn't begin over religion. It didn't even begin over power. It began because a married woman walked away. A single decision, a single night, a single ship disappearing into the dark. And by the time the flames died out, an entire civilization was gone. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you're here, it's probably because you don't just want history. You want the secrets history tried to bury, the scandals, the affairs, the betrayals they turned into myths, the controversies that textbooks quietly skipped. Because on this channel, we don't talk about dates and dry facts. We talk about desire that destroyed empires, love affairs that turned into wars, and people history blamed because the truth was too uncomfortable. So, if that's your kind of history, go ahead and subscribe. And while you're listening, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're listening from. I read every single comment because this channel isn't about lectures. It's about getting lost in history together. Put your phone down. Close your eyes if you want. Let's disappear into the past and overdose on the stories they never wanted us to hear. Now, let's go back to Helen. Tonight, we're talking about Helen of Troy, the woman history accused of destroying the ancient world. For 3,000 years, her name has been spoken like a warning. They called her a seductress, a traitor, a curse wrapped in beauty. They said she was the face that launched 1,000 ships. But here's the question no one ever asks. Why were so many men willing to die over one woman? Because when you strip away the poetry, strip away the gods, strip away the myth, what's left is something far more disturbing. This wasn't a love story. It was a story about ego, control, and what happens when powerful men are humiliated. And Helen was never the cause. She was the excuse. Stay with me, because once you see this story clearly, you'll never hear it the same way again. Before we go any further, let me pause here for a moment. If you're listening to this, you're probably not here for neat timelines or textbook history. You're here for the parts history tried to clean up, the affairs they turned into legends, the scandals they disguised as myths, the uncomfortable truths buried under heroic poetry. That's what this channel is about. On this channel, we explored the controversies, the betrayals, the forbidden romances, and the human flaws that shaped the world far more than dates ever did. So if you enjoy losing yourself in a history like this, go ahead and subscribe. And while you're listening, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Late night, headphones on, driving through empty roads. I read every comment because this isn't about lectures. It's about getting lost in the past together. All right, let's go back. To understand Helen of Troy, you first need to understand the world she was born into. This is Bronze Age Greece, around 1,200 years before the Common Era. There are no nations, no laws, no safety nets. Power exists only as long as other men believe you deserve it. Kings rule not because they are kind, but because they are feared. And reputation is everything. Lose your reputation and you lose your throne. Lose your honor and you invite violence. This is a world where wars don't need reasons. They need excuses. And women in this world are not individuals. They are currency. They are alliances wrapped in flesh. They are political leverage disguised as marriage. Helen was born into this system. From the moment she entered the world, she wasn't seen as a child. She was seen as a future prize. Ancient writers didn't describe her beauty the way we do today. They didn't say she was pretty or attractive. They said she was overwhelming, unnatural, as if her appearance disrupted order itself. Men didn't just want Helen. They competed over her. They fought over the idea of possessing her, because marrying Helen meant legitimacy. It meant prestige. It meant dominance over rivals. Helen wasn't admired. She was weaponized. And the men around her knew it, especially her father. Helen's father was King Tyndareus of Sparta. He understood something dangerous. Choosing a husband for Helen wasn't a romantic decision. It was a geopolitical one. By the time Helen reached marriageable age, Greece was already tense. Powerful men from across the region arrived to compete for her hand. Warriors, princes, future kings. Each one believed that marrying Helen would elevate them above the rest. And Tyndareus knew the truth. If he chose one man, every other man would feel insulted. An insult in this world demanded blood. So Tyndareus did something unprecedented, something that would echo across history. Before Helen chose her husband, he forced every suitor to swear an oath, a sacred oath made before the gods themselves. They swore that whoever Helen married, they would protect that marriage, no matter what happened, no matter who challenged it, no matter the cost. It was meant to prevent war. Instead, it guaranteed one. Helen chose Menelaus. Not the most powerful, not the most charismatic, but politically safe. Menelaus was respectable, predictable, connected, on paper, the perfect choice. Helen became Queen of Sparta. Just like that, her life stopped being her own. She became something to be guarded, something to be defended, something men would one day kill for. For a while, things were quiet. Helen married Menelaus. She bore him a daughter. Life continued. From the outside, it looked stable. But stability in a violent world is always temporary. And the crack appeared when a ship from Troy arrived in Sparta. On board was Paris, Prince of Troy. And from the moment he stepped into Helen's story, nothing would ever be the same. Paris was not a hero. He wasn't raised to rule. In fact, he was almost abandoned at birth. A prophecy had warned that he would destroy Troy. So his own family cast him out. He grew up away from court, away from politics, away from consequence. By the time he returned as a prince, he was charming, reckless, and dangerously unaware of what he was about to unleash. Paris arrived in Sparta under the protection of hospitality, a sacred rule. Guests were not to be harmed. They were to be welcomed, protected, trusted. And it was under that protection that Paris saw Helen. What happened next has been debated for 3,000 years. Some ancient sources blame the gods. They say Aphrodite cursed Helen with desire. Others say Paris seduced her, slowly, carefully. But there's a version of this story that ancient writers hated the most. The version where Helen chose, where she wasn't kidnapped, where she wasn't dragged away screaming, where she made a decision. Because if Helen chose to leave, then everything that followed becomes much harder to justify. And yet, one fact remains. Helen left Sparta. She left her husband. She left her child. She boarded a ship with Paris, and she sailed toward Troy. She didn't know it yet, but that single act would set the ancient world on fire. And when Menelaus returned home and found his palace empty, history would take a very dark turn. Desire, scandal, and the moment Greece finds out. When Menelaus returned to Sparta, he expected routine. He expected order. He expected his household exactly as he had left it. Instead, he walked into silence. No Helen, no explanations, no warning, only absence. And in a world built on dominance, absence was louder than betrayal. At first, Menelaus didn't panic. Kings didn't panic. They assumed obedience. He assumed Helen had gone to a nearby temple or a neighboring estate, or was delayed for some trivial reason. But hours passed. Then servants began to whisper. Then ships were counted. And when the truth surfaced, it hit with a force far greater than grief. Helen had left, not kidnapped, not rescued, gone. She had boarded a foreign ship with a Trojan prince, and that detail mattered more than anything else. Because this wasn't just a wife leaving her husband. This was Sparta being insulted by Troy. In Bronze Age politics, adultery wasn't personal. It was political. Paris hadn't simply taken Helen. He had violated hospitality. He had mocked Menelaus's authority. He had declared, without words, that Troy could take whatever it wanted from Sparta, and Menelaus understood something immediately. If he did nothing, every king in Greece would see him as weak. His throne would become a target. So whatever love he once had for Helen was buried beneath something far more dangerous, humiliation. And humiliation demanded spectacle. While Menelaus raged in Sparta, Helen was already far from Greece. The ship cut through dark water. The oars moved quietly. The coastline disappeared behind them. Helen didn't know what awaited her in Troy, but she knew one thing. There was no return without consequences. Ancient writers struggled with this moment. They wanted Helen either screaming or unconscious, because a woman choosing desire over duty terrified them. So they invented gods. They blamed Aphrodite. They said Helen was cursed. But curses are convenient. They remove responsibility. And the uncomfortable truth is this. Helen left willingly enough to stay gone. On the journey, Paris wasn't thinking about war. He wasn't thinking about politics. He was thinking about possession. Paris had grown up without consequences, without court discipline, without restraint. And now he had the one thing every powerful man in Greece wanted. Not just a woman, a symbol. Paris believed beauty alone could protect him. He believed charm could smooth over insult. He believed Troy's walls would shield him from Greek rage. He was catastrophically wrong. When Helen arrived in Troy, the city didn't celebrate. It hesitated. The elders knew what this meant. They had seen wars start over far less. Helen wasn't welcomed as a bride. She was studied like a threat. And yet, she was accepted because sending her back would be an admission of guilt. And Troy, like Sparta, lived by pride. Helen was given status, protection, a place within the city. And with every passing day, the situation hardened. What might have been reversible no longer was. Back in Greece, Menelaus invoked the oath, the one sworn years earlier, the oath designed to prevent chaos. Messengers were sent, kings were summoned, and one by one they arrived. Not because they cared about Helen, but because refusing meant looking weak. Agamemnon came first, king of Mycenae, Menelaus' brother, a man who understood power better than mercy. To Agamemnon, Helen was irrelevant. What mattered was opportunity. A war against Troy meant wealth, slaves, territory, prestige, and more importantly, leadership. Agamemnon didn't ask whether the war was justified. He asked whether it could be won. Others followed. Odysseus tried to avoid the call. He feigned madness, pretended insanity to escape the oath. But even that failed, because oaths in this world were traps. Once sworn, they owned you. Achilles was dragged into it, young, unmatched, already angry at fate. Each man brought his own reasons. Honor, fear, greed. None of them were about Helen, but Helen's name would be used. Again, and again, and again. In Troy, Helen understood something long before the armies arrived. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a justification. Her name traveled faster than ships. Rumors reached the city. The Greeks were mobilizing. hundreds of vessels, thousands of men. Helen was blamed quietly at first, then openly, then violently. She heard it in the way people spoke, in the way eyes followed her. She had not ordered this, but she would be punished for it anyway. Ancient sources describe Helen standing on Troy's walls, watching the Greek ships arrive, identifying men she once knew, men who had once smiled at her, now armored, now furious, now marching to kill. And this is where the myth fractures, because Helen doesn't rejoice. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't beg. She watches, silent, trapped between worlds, belonging to neither. When the Greeks landed, they didn't negotiate. They didn't send diplomats. They burned, they pillaged, they made a point. This wasn't about retrieval. This was about dominance. The first battles were savage. Men died before they understood why. Cities allied with Troy were wiped out simply for standing nearby. And all of it was justified with a single phrase: "We are here for Helen." Inside Troy, arguments erupted. Some demanded Helen be returned. Others insisted that surrender would mean weakness. Paris refused. He hid behind walls, behind brothers, behind soldiers willing to die for his mistake. And the longer the war dragged on, the clearer the truth became. This war wasn't caused by love. It was sustained by pride. And pride doesn't negotiate. As months turned into years, Helen's position became unbearable. She was blamed for Greek deaths, blamed for Trojan deaths, blamed for storms, blamed for losses. She was alive, and that alone made her guilty. Some stories claim she tried to escape. Others say she contemplated death. But the most consistent detail is this: Helen survived, while men died in their thousands. And survival, in myth, is often treated as sin. The war dragged on. Heroes emerged: Achilles, Hector, Patroclus, names that would echo for millennia. But Helen remained a shadow, present, watching, remembered only when blame was needed, and as the bodies piled up, as the land soaked in blood. The Greeks realized something terrifying. Troy was not falling. Strength wasn't enough. Honor wasn't enough. And if the city could not be taken by force, then it would have to be taken by deception. A plan was forming. A plan that would end the war and erase Troy from the earth. But before that plan could succeed, one final tragedy would break the last illusion of heroism, and Helen would witness it all. Heroes, rage, and the collapse of meaning. By the third year of the war, something had changed. The speeches stopped, or the ideals faded. No one spoke about honor anymore. They spoke about survival. The Trojan War was no longer a campaign. It was a slow, grinding machine that consumed men and returned nothing. The land around Troy was stripped bare. Villages were burned not for strategy, but for frustration. Prisoners were taken, not for ransom, but for labor. The Greeks were trapped far from home. The Trojans were trapped behind walls, and in the middle of it all, Helen watched the world rot. Inside Troy, daily life became a performance. People pretended the war would end, pretended the walls would hold forever, pretended the cost was worth it. But grief seeped through everything. Every family had lost someone. Every household waited for footsteps that never came back. And Helen's presence was impossible to ignore. She walked the streets like a living reminder of what started this, of why it couldn't end. Some avoided her, some stared, some whispered curses under their breath. Helen learned to move quietly, to exist without being seen, because visibility in times like these was dangerous. Across the battlefield, Achilles was unraveling. He was the greatest warrior of his age, fast, brutal, unmatched, and yet he was not fighting for Helen. He was fighting for recognition. Achilles believed he deserved more glory, more respect. more spoils. And when Agamemnon took a captive woman from him as punishment, Achilles broke, not emotionally, politically. He withdrew from the war, and the consequences were immediate. Without Achilles, Greek morale collapsed. Trojan forces surged, the balance shifted. Men who had survived years of battle suddenly began to die in waves, and still Helen's name was used as justification, as excuse, as narrative glue holding together a war that no longer made sense. Patroclus died wearing Achilles' armor, killed by Hector, and when Achilles saw the body, the war changed. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was vengeance. Achilles returned to the battlefield like something inhuman. He slaughtered Trojans without mercy. He hunted Hector. He dragged his body through the dirt. This was not heroism. It was rage unfiltered. And the poets praised it, because brutality is easier to admire than restraint. Inside Troy, Helen recognized the shift. The war was no longer about retrieval. It was about annihilation. Hector's death shattered the city's confidence. The greatest defender of Troy was gone, and with him, hope bled out quietly. Priam begged, women wailed, the future collapsed inward. Helen saw mothers cling to sons, sons who would die anyway. And for the first time, ancient sources show Helen speaking openly, not defending herself, not blaming the gods, but expressing regret, not for leaving Sparta, but for surviving long enough to see this. The gods, once so active in the story, began to fade, because even myth struggled to justify what was happening. This war had exceeded meaning. It had outgrown narrative. It continued not because it needed to, but because it could not stop. Men could not admit the cost was too high, because then the deaths would be meaningless, and meaningless deaths are the most unbearable kind. Years passed. Children grew up knowing nothing but war. Soldiers aged into exhaustion. Weapons dulled. Songs turned somber. Even victory felt empty. And then, quietly, the Greeks began to lie. They realized something brutal. Troy could not be taken by force. The walls were too strong, the defenders too desperate. So honor was discarded. Strategy replaced valor. A deception was proposed, one that would end everything. The Trojan horse was not genius. It was desperation, a final gamble by men who had already lost too much to walk away. The Greeks built it in silence, a massive wooden offering, a lie carved into shape. They pretended to leave. They sailed away. They left the horse behind. And Troy did what exhausted cities always do. They hoped, they argued, they ignored warnings, because believing the war was over felt better than suspicion. Helen saw the horse. And here the stories fracture again. Some say she circled it, called out names, tested for movement. Others say she said nothing, because warning Troy wouldn't save her. It would only delay the inevitable. Either way, the horse was pulled inside the walls, and Troy sealed its fate with celebration. That night, the city slept. For the first time in years, there were no watchfires, no alarms, no screams, only relief. And inside the horse, men waited. When the gates opened, history would end, and Helen would survive again. But survival, as she was about to learn, comes with a cost far worse than death. The night the world ended, and the woman who lived. The night Troy fell did not begin with screaming. It began with silence. The city had waited 10 years for this moment. 10 years of alarms. 10 years of mourning. 10 years of watching sons leave and never return. And now, for the first time in a decade, the war appeared to be over. The Greek ships were gone. The camps were empty. The beaches were quiet. The people of Troy celebrated cautiously at first, then openly. Wine flowed, music returned, guards relaxed, watchfires burn low, and behind the city walls, a generation that had never known peace finally slept. Inside the horse, Greek soldiers waited. They did not sleep. They did not celebrate. They listened. They counted footsteps. They felt the city relax around them. And when the time came, they moved. The gates of Troy were opened from within, not for negotiation, not for mercy, for slaughter. Greek forces poured into the city under cover of darkness. What followed was not a battle. It was a purge. Men were cut down in their homes. Elders were killed at altars. Children were dragged from beds and thrown from walls. Women were seized, divided, branded as spoils. This was the reward for victory. This was the end of honor. The Greeks did not reclaim Helen. They destroyed Troy. Ancient poets described the fall with admiration. They called it clever, strategic, inevitable. But the truth is uglier. Troy didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because exhaustion makes hope dangerous, and hope makes people careless. The city burned through the night. Its towers collapsed, its streets filled with smoke and screams. And Helen was there, watching, surviving. Again, Helen was found alive. That alone enraged some Greeks, because survival felt like defiance. Some accounts say Menelaus raised his sword to kill her. Others say he hesitated. Others say she revealed herself deliberately. Whatever the truth, Helen lived. And that fact disturbed everyone, because death would have been simpler, cleaner, easier to explain. Instead, she returned to Sparta, to the man whose humiliation had started everything, to the world that would never forgive her. Troy was erased, not conquered, erased, its people scattered or enslaved, its name turned into legend, its ruins buried. The Greeks returned home with scars, ghosts, and nothing resembling satisfaction. Many would die on their journeys back. Some would never recover. Victory did not heal them, because victory never heals anyone. And Helen? Helen became the story. The poets needed a reason, so they chose her. They called her the face that launched 1,000 ships. They said her beauty caused madness. They said her desire destroyed men. They renamed her, not Helen of Sparta, not Helen the Queen, Helen of Troy, a woman forever associated with a city she did not build, and a war she did not command. But here's what history quietly avoided. Helen did not declare war. Men did. Helen did not swear the oath. Men did. Helen did not burn cities. Men did. Helen made a choice in a world that allowed her none. And for that, she was blamed forever. The Trojan War wasn't about love. It was about pride, about male honor so fragile it could not survive humiliation, about alliances so rigid they turned personal betrayal into mass murder. Helen's affair didn't cause the war. It triggered it, like a spark in a room soaked with oil. And history chose to remember the spark instead of the men who filled the room. That is why this story still matters. Because we still do this. We blame symbols instead of systems. We blame individuals instead of power. We blame desire instead of control. And when destruction follows, we tell ourselves it was inevitable. Helen lived the rest of her life under a shadow, forgiven in some stories, punished in others, but always watched, always remembered, not as a person, but as a warning. And that may be the cruelest part of all, because Helen of Troy didn't destroy the world. She revealed it. And as the fires of Troy faded into history, the pattern remained, waiting for the next name, the next excuse, the next war. And now, we've reached the end of our story. If you're still awake, that's okay. And if you're already drifting, that's even better. History has a way of fading once the noise is gone. The walls quiet down, the voices soften, and the past slowly settles back into the dark. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to stay focused. Just let the story dissolve. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. If your thoughts are wandering, let them wander. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is for you, I hope you feel calm. I hope you feel safe. I hope you feel ready to rest. We'll be here again with another quiet story from the past, whenever you need it. For now, good night, sleep well, and let history fade away.